I'm going to be reading out of Psalms 105. So if you guys have a Bible on your phone or a hard copy, you guys can open that up. I'll give you about 2 seconds to get to before I start to. Because it's not up there, so if you want to follow along, feel free to use this. Please follow music. She kind of talking this. Being in the pool, it was like 50 degrees over there every day. I feel like the pool is just stopping to my lungs. So I keep coughing. So Psalm 105, and I want to read up to verse 7. So it says this: Remember, give thanks to Yahweh, call upon his name, make known his acts amongst the people. Sing to him, sing praises to him, move on his wondrous, all his wondrous deeds. Boast in his holy name, and let the heart of those who seek Yahweh be glad. And this is the verse I'm going to pinpoint on, but it says this: Inquire of Yahweh and his strength, seek his face continually. Remember his wondrous deeds, which he has done, his miracles and judgments uttered by his mouth. O seed of Abraham's servant, O son of Jacob, chosen ones, he is Yahweh our God, and his judgments are on all the earth. And only verse C, and he has remembered the covenant forever, the word which commanded for 1,000 generations. David writes songs, and I think it's beautiful to dig through the songs to pull from them the way that he thinks, the way that he processes things. David, when he's being picked by Samuel to anoint as king instead of Saul, is the one who he sees, and the outward appearance of David is not something which Samuel would have selected as a king. It describes him as being humble of stature, not crazy to look at, not the tallest, not the strongest. But what Samuel says, it says that this is a man after God's own heart. That David is someone whose heart was fulfilled to the heart of David, or the heart of God. We see it when David sinned against God and against Uriah and Bathsheba, where he takes her as his woman without when he shouldn't have. He kills Uriah. We see how his heart responds in mourning at his transgression when Nathan calls him out. That he fasts and he says, "I will not leave this place seeking out after God until he kills my son." And if he doesn't, so be it. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And his son actually dies in childbirth. And David gets up and he said, "Bring me some food." God has made his decision. And we see David's heart is shaped differently than we often think. Normally, people would be upset. They'd say, "Why, God? Why did you do this? Why did you harm this? Why did you bring sickness?" But David's content to know that God has made this decision because he was a man after God's own heart. And so when we begin to look at this idea of seeing God, he writes this, and it's a concept that's used constantly throughout the Bible. He says, my translation says, inquire of Yahweh in strength and seek his face continually. The translation I use is intentional about using some words to make me, oh, that's different. The word also is translated seek Yahweh. And so most translations use verse 4 to say, seek of Yahweh, strength, seek his face continually. And often in the English, you don't catch that those are two different words that he's using. They use two words. One are both the Hebrew, and the first one is Dorash. It says Dorash of Yahweh is strength, and the second word, but Kosh, his face continually. They're two different words, but often the English uses the same word, seek. Barash is this idea of inquiring, examining, seeking with intentionality, with care. It's like when you hear this idea, this thought of, what is the, let's take shark. I'm a viewer. Like you like sharks for some reason, and you want to know everything about a shark. You want to know its habitat, its feeding schedule, where does it swim to, how does it migrate, how long are its fins, why can it stay underwater for so long? Do they breathe air? We begin to acquire every little thing about it, about this shark, because you want to know the intricate details. That's what he's saying here. That's what David is saying. Inquire of Yahweh. Look and learn the intricate details of Yahweh. Seek out after how his heart is, what he cares about, what he chooses to love, what he chooses to hate. And you begin to study all these different things to know him better. It's not just knowing about him, but it's knowing who he is. For those of you who are married, when you first started dating, you get to know each other. You ask each other a hard question. You begin to think, how does this person think? How do they respond to these situations? When you go through heartbeats, when you argue, how do they treat people? How do they respond? How do they act? All these things are because of the inquiry of God. The David is talking about, well, we're beginning to discover who God is. We're beginning to identify his behaviors, his action, his attitudes, his love, his characteristics. And so when we, the right word is doresh God, we seek with care. We seek with a desire to know, with our intentness of seeking to know who he is. Not seeking to know about him, but seeking to know who he is. I can know about Hannah. I can know that she, enjoys playing any game that has horses on it. I can know that she enjoys, you know, whatever it is, XYZ, but I may not know why she does that. I may not know the heart behind it. I can know that she does it, but I don't understand why she does it. But when I Doresh Hannah, I seek to inquire, I seek to know, I seek to understand the agency, I can know the heart behind why she does the things she does. And that's the same with God. When I Doresh him, when I seek to inquire, not just that he does something, but I know why he does it. I get to grow closer to him because I know why he responds the way he responds. Think about one of the great questions that a lot of youth people have that are soaring in faith and say, why did God crush the Amalekites? Why did he have Saul to eradicate every single person in that tribe? Why did they have to kill them? God must be angry. God must be evil. I know the actions of God here, but what's the heart behind it? We see that these people are people who sacrifice their children to Moloch. We see that the people who sacrifice their newborns to their God, that it's detestable for God for them to do that. We see that their actions towards people are detestable to God. The culture is contrary to everything God believes about, everything that is seeking to instill within the Israelites. And so there was purpose behind why he did this. We see that there's a heart behind it, not that he hated the people, but that the sin they were doing was so egregious against him and against the people around them that they had to have been removed in order to stop them. So when we direct God, when we seek to inquire, when we seek to understand, we know that the heart behind the people who suffer. Same with the Israelites. We ask, why did he have this to Israel? How come he didn't just make them and appeal somewhere else? Why did he have to plagues in order to harm the Egyptians who were oppressing the Israelites? Well, because Christ did something that connected every single plague that every single god of Egypt to show that the God, him, the true God, was the real God as opposed to the gods of Egypt. But we also see that there was a purpose in showing his love for the Israelites who had forgotten him. His love for them so that they would draw near to him once again. When I nourish God, when I seek him with care, when I inquire about him, I do the process of getting to know the heart behind why he did things. It's that process of getting to know your spouse for the first time or you're enamored by them. You want to know every single detail. Why did he choose to do that? What happened with this? What did he think about that? It's that process. He continues, and so the light of Yahweh and his strength, not just about who he is, but his strength, his acts, the things that he does. We see that we know because I inquire, I know God is a God who heals. I know in the name of Jesus there can be healing over our bodies. I know in the name of Jesus there can be provision for us when we're struggling. I know in the name of Jesus that everything can be made right because God is God who has power. He's a God who has strength that has been evidence throughout history. We read through the book, through the Bible, we can see that God, and it said, by his mighty hand, has brought free the Israelites from captivity. And I'm not quoting it exactly, I'm illustrating it, but it says the right word is by his arm, by his strength, by his hand, he has done this things. And so they says, David here, remember his wondrous deeds in verse 5 and what he's done, his miracles and his judgments uttered by his mouth. So when I want to inquire about God, sometimes I need to encourage myself to remember that God has done things that make me curious about him, that make me want to see back to him. I remember all the miracles he's done in my life, all the things that helped me out of, all the things that he's encouraged me through. And then I think about the people who have been encouraged by me, the miracles that I worked with him. At this conference, I was in a group, there was 4 of us and a guy named Todd Clare, who I had met years ago. He was a pastor who planted like 10 churches in Minnesota, or Minneapolis, actually. He planted 10 Spanish churches out there. Amazing guy, loves the Lord. But he was encouraging us about sharing testimonies. And he asked the each to share some testimony. And the guy on my right, who's an older gentleman, he was talking about how his wife had been given a word that they were gonna be able to have a baby. She was not medically it was not medically possible for her to have a baby. And the doctors were bringing her out. She had surgery to come about having a baby, and she said, "I do not want to have surgery. God has told me we will have a baby." And he was saying that he was like, "No, we're getting that surgery. Um, I don't think God's going to do something miraculous in our lives." And he said, "We have a view. If God doesn't get us pregnant in a year, we're doing the surgery." And it was the day of the last year. He was like, I waited, nothing. The last day, I was going up to her to talk to her about doing the surgery. And she told me I'm pregnant. And it had two big sense. Because God is a God who was able to heal barren wounds. God is a God who historically in the Bible was able to restore the function of a woman to get pregnant when she wasn't able to. Because God is a God who heals. There is encouragement when you hear other testimonies, people being healed by God, that allows us to have trust that God can do us speak. That allows us to inquire about His strength. To say, if God can by his mighty arm do something for them, by his mighty arm he can do something for us. And so when I get that encouragement, that no rush to seek God, to inquire of him, I'm encouraged to know the testimonies of the people around me. What has God done in your life? What has he done in my life? I remember talking about when he asked me my bitterness that God, when I was a kid or teenager, I guess it's a fit to be now. When I was a teenager, I was so bitter. I felt like the church had taken my dad from me. He was always gone on trips. I didn't want anything to do with the church. I was living extremely away from God. And I was so bitter. And I remember God had to take me to El Salvador to two young girls. I think one was 12 and the other was 13. I was 16 at the time, but they were like that big. They were really small, malnourished. And I remember being so angry about my life and everything else. And these girls started to tell me their stories of how their lives were astronomically worse than mine, but they still loved the Lord, despite them living into the conditions in which they lived in. And I could not understand it. And I remember God breaking my heart. And I was in a church service and I felt over the back corner and I gave my life to God because I knew if God could do it for them, he could do it for me. And he softened my heart. He broke that anger, the bitterness. And yeah, I'm still get upset. And I can tell you, I don't yell. I can calm in my anger. Before, I would be instant angry. I would be screaming. I would be mad. I'd be ready to fight. Eh, but now, God has broken that bitterness. I'm able to live my life and not care what other people do because God has broken the bitterness to you. If that's something you're dealing with, and you're like, I'm so bitter, I'm angry about this thing, but God, if God can do it with me, he can do it with you. And that's what happens when we inquire about God, when we seek him in a way to know him and know why he does things. is that we learn that he can do things for us as well. The second part of this is when he says, seek his face. And the word is bakash, to seek, to find, to look for an object, to seek, to try to seek to obtain something, and then seek for one's presence, to look for the face of God. And so when David is saying it, he's saying, inquire about him, learn about him, hear the testimony of his strength and what he's done in people's lives, and then seek his face. Seek to be in his presence. Seek after him and to pull him towards you and to pull towards him. When you seek after his face, David said this, the continuous thing. It's not something that we do once, but it's this idea that we seek the presence of God. David, when he sinned against Bathsheba, and his son was in a womb dying, or maybe he was out of it. I think he was born already. He was dying. You guys can break it out. And wrong. He was dying, and David laid on his face and fasted, seeking God, seeking his face, seeking that his presence could heal his son. But he was content with the result. Another thing to look at is the upper room in Acts chapter 2, that the apostles were told, go and wait for me. Go and seek out after the helper that I'm going to send. And what did they do? They didn't just, sit down on the couch and start scrolling Instagram like I did. They sought after him in prayer. They prayed together. There was 120 of them gathered together, praying that God would meet them. And we see that constantly happening where they would seek after us. We want an example from Jesus of anytime he got overwhelmed by something, he would seek after his Father. He would go and retreat into the mountain to find to find his Father, to spend time with him. And it's the same for us when we face overwhelming things, when we face struggles, even when we're not facing something, we're encouraged to seek the face of God to pray. We could do it through reading of the Word, but prayer is what I want to focus on, is that engagement and that conversation with God, where I seek to know him. I don't just know about him, but I've inquired. I know the story of his strength. I know what he's done in other people's lives, and now I want to have a relationship with him personally, like a friend, someone who sits close to me, someone I can talk to, someone I can spend time with. And the last word is continual. It's tavi. It's a word used constantly in relation to worship. We see when God is explaining to Moses how to build the priestly robes of Aaron. Every single part of his ephod, his robe, and of the gem thing that he would wear, and of his hat, and the thing on his forehead, every single thing was meant to remind Israel of God, to encourage them to seek God. And it says, wear it on your forehead to me, continually. Wear the ephod to me, continually. When he says daily sacrifice 2 yearly lambs, he says to me, continually. To go before God daily to offer sacrifice to me, continually. He said to stand before the people for prayer, is to represent God, to show them all the things that God has done to me, continually. And so when we're talking about seeking the face of God, it's not something that I do today and then I wait till next Sunday, but it's something that I do to me continually. It's something that I choose to encounter God on a daily basis, like the priest would stand before the altar of Tamid continually to offer these sacrifices before God. And it says, so that they may be a pleasing aroma before God. When the priest sacrificed daily, it was so that it would be a pleasing aroma before God. And so when we choose to seek out after God in prayer, we read, I believe it's in Revelation, that the prayers of the saints are like incense before God, that they become a pleasing aroma before Him. And so when we seek God daily, to me, continually, we become that pleasing aroma before God, that sacrifice before Him. We seek His face, we inquire about Him, and we do so continually, where we say time in prayer for our older saints. There was a word that they used to use. They would say we tarry in the presence of God. Yeah. We tarry. Tarry is not a word of my generation, and it's a word that I often have to explain to people. But the idea of tarry is to delay, to wait, to spend time until something happens. And so when we seek God, it's to be wait in the presence of God until something happens, until something changes. Uh Man, Jordan, do you remember the evangelist who used to like? There's a story where this baby was brought to him that was dead, and he took it from the altar and punted it, and it was seeing came back to life. Okay, crazy story. Smith Wigglesworth, there you go, Wigglesworth, Pentecostal evangelist. He was anti-Pentecostal, and God radically changed him. He was a healing evangelist who would go around, preach, and people would get healed. Well, someone came up to him. He writes it in a book that I think it was him, or yeah, I think it was him. He writes it, and someone asks, "How do you spend time praying? How do you tarry before God?" And he said, "Invite him over for a cup of tea." And so they brought him to his house. He said, "I didn't leave the house until the morning because I taught them how to tarry before God." He taught them that when you seek out after God, it's not let me pray for 5 minutes and well, God didn't do anything. That's it. I'm going to go back to watching TV. He taught them that when you tarry before God and you're seeking out after something, you spend time dedicated until He does something. Like the people in the upper room, they didn't leave until the Spirit of God descended upon them. And so, if you're seeking a healing for something, tarry before God. Spend your night praying. Say, I don't work night tomorrow, so I'm going to stay up all night today praying before God, asking that He would bring healing. When Hannah, and I just read this a couple days ago, in the book of Samuel, Samuel's mother, went before the altar, and she said, God, I want a son. She was barren. She wasn't able to have a baby. And she laid down prostrate in front of the altar and she prayed and said, God, give me a son and he will be dedicated to you. I will give him to you. And she's terrible. And every time she would come to the temple and I would at it, lay before the altar and pray. All up until the priest would be like, you must be drunk. What are you doing in here? She said, I'm not drunk, I'm seeking God. And he said, go, doesn't make it done for you. And she became pregnant. And she gave her son to the Lord, and that was Samuel, the man who anointed Hagar. And so we see when you tarry before God and you wait for something to happen and you continue to keep going before Him, God will do miraculous things in your life. God will answer the prayers you seek after. But we have to tarry. We have to be willing to inquire God, to seek the face of God, to do it continually to meet. And so I preach a little longer than I wanted to, but I want us to practice tarrying before God. And I'm only going to keep you here for a few minutes. I want you to practice more at home. I want you to spend time praying, but I want us to do something a little bit different. I'm going to invite the team to come up, unless you're someone who needs prayer. You need prayer, don't come up. But I want to do something different. I want us to come to the front and I want us to pray alongside one another.